I thought I had everything figured out. 6 months until my wedding to Marcus, the man who made me laugh until my sides hurt and held me through my darkest days after Dad passed. My sister Sarah would be my maid of honor, just like we had promised each other as kids. Mom was finally smiling again after months of grief. Our little family was healing, or so I believed. But that evening, when Sarah stormed out of our family dinner slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled, I knew something was terribly wrong. Before I share what happened next, could you let me know where you are watching from? Please hit that like button and subscribe if this story resonates with you. Trust me, you will want to stick around for this one, because what I discovered about my own family will leave you speechless. Let me take you back to how everything started falling apart. My name is Ivy, and at 27, I thought I had my life together. I worked as a marketing manager for a tech startup in downtown Seattle, had my own apartment with a view of Elliott Bay, and was planning the wedding of my dreams. Marcus, my fiancé, was everything I could have asked for in a partner. We met 2 years ago at a coffee shop, where he accidentally spilled his latte on my laptop. Instead of just apologizing, he insisted on buying me a new one and taking me to dinner to make up for potentially ruining my work. That dinner turned into a second date, then a third, and before I knew it, he was proposing on the same pier where we had our first real conversation about our futures. My family dynamic was complicated, especially after Dad died last year from a sudden heart attack. Mom Patricia was 55 and had been a nurse before retiring early to take care of Dad during his final months. She never quite recovered from losing him and seemed to float through life in a constant state of barely controlled grief. Sarah, my older sister at 30, had always been the more turbulent one in our family. She was brilliant. Do not get me wrong with a degree in graphic design from art school, but she struggled to hold down steady work. 3 months ago, she had been laid off from her position at a marketing firm, which sent her into a downward spiral of self-doubt and bitterness. What made everything more difficult was how differently Mom treated us. Growing up, Sarah was always the one who needed more attention, more help, more understanding. When she struggled in school, Mom hired tutors. When she could not find work, Mom helped pay her bills. When she went through messy breakups, Mom was there with tissues and ice cream. I learned early to be independent, to handle my problems quietly, to not add to Mom's burden. Dad used to tell me I was his little warrior, always so strong and capable. I treasured those moments with him, but I never realized how much Sarah resented them until much later. The first signs that something was wrong began about 2 months before that terrible dinner. Sarah started making these cutting little comments whenever Marcus and I shared good news. When I told the family about getting a promotion at work, she rolled her eyes and muttered something about nepotism and luck. When Marcus surprised me with weekend tickets to Vancouver for my birthday, she sarcastically commented about how nice it must be to have a boyfriend with money to throw around. I tried to brush it off as Sarah being Sarah, dealing with her own struggles in her own way. But Marcus was changing too. My usually attentive fiancé started working late more often, claiming his software development team was under pressure to meet deadlines. Our nightly phone calls became shorter, our weekend plans frequently got canceled, and when we were together, he seemed distracted. When I would catch him staring at his phone with this strange expression, he would quickly put it away and change the subject. I told myself he was just stressed about work and wedding planning, that all couples went through rough patches. The strangest part was how Sarah suddenly became very interested in our wedding plans. She would ask detailed questions about our timeline, our venue choices, our guest list. At first, I was thrilled that she seemed excited and involved. We had grown apart somewhat as adults, caught up in our separate lives and struggles, so I welcomed her renewed interest in my happiness. She even offered to help with wedding planning tasks, which felt like the sister relationship I had always wanted us to have. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was. Mom started acting strangely around the same time, avoiding eye contact when I talked about Marcus, changing the subject whenever I brought up wedding details. She would get this pained expression on her face like she was carrying some terrible secret. When I asked if everything was okay, she would just say she was tired or missing Dad, which seemed reasonable enough. I was so focused on my own happiness that I failed to see the obvious signs that my entire world was built on lies. The breaking point came when I decided to host what I thought would be a celebration dinner. I had just secured our dream venue after months of searching and wanted to share the good news with my family. I spent the entire Saturday cooking Mom's famous pot roast, setting the table with Dad's good china, and creating what I hoped would be a perfect evening. Marcus seemed unusually nervous when he arrived, keeping his hands shoved deep in his pockets and barely making eye contact with anyone. Sarah showed up an hour late with no apology, already in a foul mood about something she refused to discuss. I should have trusted my instincts that night, but instead I pushed forward with my plan to investigate what was really going on. The morning after that disastrous dinner, I could not shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial. Sarah's bitter comments about my life being too easy, Marcus's guilty expression, Mom's nervous energy, it all felt connected somehow. I decided I needed to find out what was happening before it destroyed what was left of my family relationships. My first opportunity came 3 days later, when Marcus fell asleep on my couch after claiming he was too exhausted to drive home. His phone was charging on my kitchen counter, and for the first time in our relationship, I did something I never thought I would do. I checked his messages. What I found made my stomach drop. There were several deleted conversation threads, but the message preview showed fragments that made no sense. Why would Marcus be deleting conversations he had never been secretive about his phone before, often asking me to answer texts for him while he was driving or cooking? The next morning I made an excuse about having a dentist appointment and instead followed Marcus when he left for work. Instead of heading toward his downtown office, he drove to a small cafe in my neighborhood, the same cafe where Sarah often went to work on her freelance design projects. Through the window, I watched my fiancé and my sister sitting across from each other at a corner table, their heads close together in intense conversation. When Sarah reached across the table and covered Marcus's hand with hers, my world tilted sideways. I sat in my car for 20 minutes after they left, trying to process what I had witnessed. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe Sarah was helping Marcus plan a surprise for me. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. But the sick feeling in my stomach told me otherwise. I spent the rest of the day in a daze replaying every interaction between Marcus and Sarah over the past few months, seeing them through new eyes. The way Sarah's questions about our wedding plans suddenly seemed more sinister. The way Marcus had been so supportive when Sarah lost her job, offering to help her with her resume and job search. The way they both seemed to know each other's schedules and preferences better than I had realized. That evening, I made a decision that would change everything. I remembered that Sarah still used the same laptop she had in college, an old MacBook that Dad had bought her, and that she never updated or secured properly. More importantly, I knew she auto-saved everything to a cloud backup account that she had shared with the family years ago for photo storage. While Sarah was out at one of her mysterious evening appointments, I accessed her backup files from my own computer. What I found there destroyed me. Dozens of selfies of Sarah and Marcus together, dating back 6 months. Screenshots of their text conversations, where they called each other pet names and made plans to meet. Bank statements showing that Marcus had been sending Sarah money every month covering her rent and groceries while she was unemployed. But the worst part was reading their conversations about me. Sarah had painted me as selfish and oblivious someone who did not deserve the happiness I had. She told Marcus that I had always been Dad's favorite, that I had gotten every opportunity while she struggled, that it was unfair how easy my life had been compared to hers. Marcus, the man I thought loved me unconditionally, had agreed with her. In their messages, he complained that I was too focused on my career, too independent, too unwilling to depend on him the way Sarah did. He said Sarah understood him in ways I never could, that she needed him while I just wanted him. Reading those words felt like being stabbed repeatedly. Every sweet moment Marcus and I had shared, every future plan we had made, every intimate conversation we had had about building a life together, it had all been a lie. I printed out the most damaging screenshots and bank statements, my hands shaking as the evidence of their betrayal accumulated on my desk. 6 months of deception. 6 months of my sister and my fiancé conducting an affair right under my nose while I planned a wedding to a man who was supporting another woman behind my back. 6 months of family dinners where they both sat at the same table as me, pretending to care about my happiness while actively working to undermine it. But I was not going to confront them yet. I needed to know how deep this betrayal went and whether anyone else in my family was aware of what was happening. If Mom knew about this and had said nothing, then I had lost more than just a fiancé and a sister. I would have lost my entire family, the foundation of everything I thought I could count on in this world. So I planned one more family dinner, but this time I would be controlling the conversation. This time, I would be recording everything. And this time, I would finally get the truth no matter how much it hurt. The dinner I planned for the following Sunday was the most difficult performance of my life. I invited Marcus and Sarah separately, telling each of them that I had important news to share with the family. I spent hours cooking an elaborate meal, setting the table with candles and flowers, creating the illusion of a celebration while my heart was breaking with every preparation. I had hidden a recording device in the centerpiece, determined to capture whatever confessions or denials were about to unfold. Marcus arrived first, carrying flowers, and wearing the nervous smile that I now understood had nothing to do with excitement about our relationship. He kept checking his phone and glancing toward the door, clearly anxious about Sarah's arrival. When she finally showed up 30 minutes late as usual, the tension in the room became thick enough to cut with a knife. They barely looked at each other, but I caught the subtle glance they shared when they thought I was not paying attention. Mom seemed to sense that something was wrong from the moment she sat down. She kept fidgeting with her napkin and asking if I was feeling all right, saying I looked pale. I assured her I was fine, that I was just excited to share my news with the people I loved most. The irony of those words was not lost on me as I looked around the table at the 3 people who had been lying to me for months. I started slowly talking about how grateful I was for family, for having people in my life who I could trust completely. I mentioned how important honesty and loyalty were in relationships, how much I valued the people who had always been truthful with me. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her seat, and Marcus developed a sudden intense interest in his dinner plate. Mom just looked confused, still unaware of the bomb I was about to detonate. Then I pulled out the folder I had prepared. I placed the first photograph on the table, a selfie of Marcus and Sarah at the cafe, their faces close together and smiling. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus went completely white, and Sarah's fork clattered to her plate. Mom gasped and reached for the photo, studying it with growing horror and understanding. I continued methodically, laying out bank statements showing Marcus's payments to Sarah. Screenshots of their text messages calling each other baby and sweetheart, evidence of 6 months of secret meetings and shared intimacy. With each piece of evidence, I watched my family's facades crumble. Marcus started stammering excuses about how it was not what it looked like, how he could explain everything. Sarah said nothing, just stared at the evidence with a mixture of defiance and guilt. But when I pulled out the printed conversations where they had discussed me, where Sarah had called me selfish, and Marcus had agreed that I did not appreciate him enough, something snapped inside my sister. She slammed her hand on the table so hard that the wine glasses jumped, and suddenly months of hidden resentment came pouring out. She screamed that I had always gotten everything handed to me, that Dad had loved me more, that I had landed a great job while she struggled to find work, that even when she finally found a man who understood her, he was already engaged to me. She accused me of being blind to other people's pain, of floating through life without ever having to fight for anything, of not deserving the happiness that came so easily to me. Marcus tried to interrupt her, to calm her down, but Sarah was beyond rational conversation. She told me that she had seduced Marcus because she was tired of watching me have everything while she had nothing. She said it was unfair that I got the successful career, the loving relationship, the family's approval, while she got criticism and disappointment and constant struggle. At that point, I turned to Mom, who had been sitting in stunned silence throughout this explosion. I asked her directly if she had known about Marcus and Sarah's affair. The look on Mom's face told me everything before she even spoke. She started crying, admitting that Sarah had told her about her feelings for Marcus months ago, that she had begged Mom not to say anything because she promised she would not act on those feelings. But Mom had seen them together, had known they were meeting secretly, had watched Sarah accept money from Marcus to pay her bills. She had chosen to protect Sarah's secret instead of warning me that my fiancé was cheating. She said she was terrified that if she told me the truth, Sarah would hurt herself the way she had threatened to do after previous disappointments in her life. That revelation broke something fundamental inside me. My own mother had chosen to protect my sister's affair over my right to know that my entire relationship was built on lies. She had watched me plan a wedding to a man who was financially supporting another woman, emotionally cheating on me, and planning to potentially leave me after our marriage. She had prioritized Sarah's mental health over my dignity and future. Sarah, seeing that her last secret had been exposed, completely lost control. She grabbed a steak knife from the table, and before anyone could react, she dragged it across her left forearm. Blood immediately began flowing, and she screamed that this was what her life had always been like, painful and damaged, while mine was perfect and untouchable. The chaos that followed was surreal. Mom was screaming and trying to stop the bleeding with napkins. Marcus was calling 911 while also trying to take the knife away from Sarah. I just sat there in shock, watching my sister hurt herself rather than face the consequences of her choices, realizing that this dramatic gesture was exactly the kind of manipulation that had controlled our family dynamics for years. When the paramedics arrived, they quickly stabilized Sarah and transported her to the hospital for stitches and psychological evaluation. I rode in the ambulance with her while Mom followed in her car, but I felt like I was watching everything happen to someone else. Marcus tried to come with us, but I told him to stay away from all of us, that he had done enough damage for one lifetime. At the hospital, while Sarah was being treated, I sat in the waiting room and made the hardest decisions of my life. I called Marcus and told him our engagement was over, that I would be returning his ring and canceling our wedding. I told him I never wanted to see him again, that he could have Sarah, if that was what they both wanted, but I would not be part of their twisted triangle anymore. When Mom tried to convince me to forgive Sarah, saying she was obviously struggling with mental health issues and needed family support, I realized that nothing was going to change. Mom would continue to enable Sarah's destructive behavior and expect me to absorb the damage for the sake of family peace. I told Mom that I could not have a relationship with either of them anymore, that their choices had consequences, and that I was choosing to protect myself rather than continue to be hurt by people who claimed to love me. I moved out of my apartment the following week and found a new place across town. I blocked Marcus's number after he sent dozens of texts trying to explain his behavior and asking for another chance. I blocked Sarah's number too, and Mom's, and for the first time in my life I experienced complete silence from the family drama that had always surrounded me. The hardest part was not the loneliness, though there was plenty of that. The hardest part was learning to trust my own instincts again after being gaslighted for so long. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in family trauma and betrayal, and she helped me understand that what had happened to me was not my fault. She taught me that my family's dysfunction was not something I needed to fix or endure. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into projects with renewed energy, and my boss noticed my increased focus and dedication. 6 months after the disaster dinner, I was promoted to senior marketing manager with a significant raise and more autonomy. For the first time, I was building a life based entirely on my own choices and values, rather than trying to maintain peace with people who did not respect me. I also started building new friendships with colleagues and neighbors who appreciated my honesty and reliability. These people did not know my history of family drama, so they interacted with me based on who I actually was, rather than who they thought I should be, to keep everyone else comfortable. I discovered that when I was not constantly managing other people's emotions and crises, I had energy and space for genuine connections with healthy people. About a year after everything fell apart, I met Daniel at a bookstore reading event. He was thoughtful and kind with a dry sense of humor that reminded me of Dad. We started as friends, both of us cautious about relationships, but our connection grew naturally into something deeper. Daniel had also experienced family betrayal when his brother stole money from their family business, so he understood my need for boundaries and my difficulty trusting people quickly. What I appreciated most about Daniel was that he never pressured me to reconcile with my family or suggested that I was being too harsh in my decisions. He supported my right to protect myself from people who had proven they would hurt me, even if they were blood relatives. With Daniel, I learned what healthy love looked like, love that did not require me to sacrifice my dignity or ignore red flags for the sake of keeping peace. 2 years after that terrible dinner, I had built a completely new life. Sarah attempted to contact me several times through mutual friends and social media, always with messages about how sorry she was and how much she missed our relationship. She had broken up with Marcus after a few months, apparently finding that a relationship built on deception and resentment was not sustainable. She was in therapy and working on her issues according to the updates I heard through our extended family. Mom also reached out periodically, usually around holidays or Dad's birthday, asking if I was ready to forgive and move forward. She never seemed to understand that forgiveness did not require me to put myself back in a position to be hurt again. I had forgiven them in the sense that I was no longer consumed with anger about what they had done, but forgiveness did not mean I owed them access to my life or future. Marcus made a few attempts to reconnect as well, sending letters to my workplace after I had blocked all his other contact methods. In his letters, he painted his affair with Sarah as a temporary lapse in judgment, a mistake he deeply regretted. He claimed he had never stopped loving me and asked for a chance to prove he could be the man I deserved. I threw those letters away without responding, understanding that the man I had fallen in love with had never really existed. The most important lesson I learned through this experience was that blood relationship does not entitle people to unlimited chances to hurt you. Some people, even people who claim to love you, will consistently choose their own immediate comfort over your well-being. Learning to identify those people and protect yourself from them is not cruel or unforgiving. It is necessary for building a life worth living. I also learned that the family you choose can be more loyal and supportive than the family you are born into. Daniel and I got married last spring in a small ceremony surrounded by friends who had proven their trustworthiness over time. It was nothing like the elaborate wedding I had planned with Marcus, but it was authentic and joyful in a way that my previous engagement never could have been. Now when people ask me about my family, I tell them about Daniel and the close friendships that sustain me. I tell them about my chosen family of people who show up consistently, who tell the truth even when it is difficult, who respect my boundaries and celebrate my successes without resentment. That is what real family looks like, and I am grateful every day that I learned the difference before it was too late. Some people say blood is thicker than water, but I learned that the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. The family you choose will always be more valuable than the family that chooses to hurt you. What about you? Have you ever had to cut ties with family members who betrayed your trust? How did you rebuild your life after discovering that people you loved were working against you? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and please hit that like button if this story resonated with your own experiences. Do not forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming betrayal and finding your strength. And if you know someone who might benefit from hearing about choosing yourself over toxic family dynamics, please share this video with them. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that you deserve relationships built on honesty and respect. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next one.